the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
This is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
Greetings and welcome everyone to this episode of AVNation TV's Connected. I'm your host David Danto, and we pretty much beat the heck out of CES 2022 over the last couple of episodes, and it was a good show and we did a lot of things. But now that CES, or what used to be called the Consumer Electronics Show, is in our rearview mirror, I wanted to have a discussion about with an industry expert and a friend of mine about what's going on with the blurred lines. What's consumer? What's enterprise? What's home office? What's office? All these things are kind of blending and merging together, and it's got a lot of interesting ramifications we might not have considered. So my guest for the show is something I can't say very often. Is a fellow. We're both we're both appointed during Infocom many years ago as an IMCCA Emerging Technology Fellow. Paul Erickson, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody where you work and what you do?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Erickson. I'm a research director for entertainment and CE at Parks Associates. And I've spent many years in the market intelligence and market research business, formerly worked with Omdia and IHS Markit, and for years as part of being with IHS Markit and their team, helped Avixa with many of their Pro AV related forecasts. So I've had the benefit over 16 years in the analyst business of working both in the consumer side of technology, especially consumer facing AV, home AV, personal tech, and so on. And of course, the Pro AV side, right? So I've been to CES, IFA, some of these other consumer electronics conferences almost as much now as I've been to Infocom, ISC, and a lot of the other conferences on the Pro AV side. So it's been very interesting working on both consumer entertainment gear as well as collaboration gear and Pro AV, and now being in a position where, thanks to the pandemic, we're seeing, as David mentioned, a lot of these lines kind of blurring when it comes to productivity and working from home. And what does it mean to have pro versus consumer gear? And what does it mean to engage in collaboration? What are you using to collaborate with? So, those lines are kind of blurred, where it's prosumer or is it consumer pro gear? What is it now? So it's an interesting time to see.
Well, let's do a little bit of a preface for a second. This is my fourth decade trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And early on in my broadcast days, the difference between the technology device and the pro technology device was that 4-cent pro label. That was the only difference. There wasn't, you could make an argument that some manufacturers had better power supplies for their pro line as opposed to their consumer line. That was true in some cases, but for the most part, it was just branding. It wasn't really a difference between maybe a different shell, a different outside. There wasn't really much of a difference. So this idea of what is consumer versus what is professional, that's been around for at least, 20, 30 years or so, I would assume. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
Okay, so what we did, and as you mentioned, with the pandemic, without getting too much into the horrors of everything that's gone on and is still going on, as you can hear in my voice, we poured some gasoline on the fire. The pandemic was a technology accelerant.
Yes.
It didn't make anything happen, in my opinion, anyway. And correct me, because please, your opinion, is why you're here. It didn't make anything happen that wasn't already going to happen. It just made it happen a lot faster.
Right.
It made people realize that, what, all the naysaying about remote work was all poppycock, that it was really, people can stay in business and be alert and be adults when they're not in the office. They can communicate over video. God, I remember in the early, the late 1990s, we were talking about video as the new voice. And, guess what? Now it is. There are no calls with any. So would you agree? I mean, even Microsoft CEOs said, the 2 months of 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months, and people have been extrapolating that, 4 years in 4 months, 8 years in 8 months. We hit the accelerator and we haven't let up yet. Is that a fair take on what's going on in the technology space right now?
I would say so. I mean, I think we still haven't seen the full ramifications of it yet, right? I mean, because we have certain industries that reluctantly have begun to really dig into being remote, right? And what that means. And it's not, they realize now that it's not this temporary thing that people are going to get over, right? So you had a lot of these industries that are very strong holdovers, especially investment banking. I think it was Morgan Stanley and a few others that virtually gave their employees, CEOs, that they need to be back in the office by a certain date. And they've moved those goalposts several times now. And, Omicron's had a role in that as well. But now they're realizing that, well, they need to push it back again. And, it's now 6 months past when they first said it was that drop dead deadline that employees have to be back in the office because our company is built on office work. And yet the company's not failed with this lack of, in-office work. And so you have the full ramifications of it socially and employment wise still panning out. But I think at the most fundamental level, we've already seen that companies that have held off on either that cultural change, that technological change, that functional change in how they conduct business every day, they were drop kicked into having to do it to survive, right? And as you mentioned, many have discovered, or most, if not all, have discovered that, okay, well, actually, this can work mostly remote. And it's crazy to think of how much has changed besides just that location-based factor, right? People can't come into the office anymore because of quarantines and lockdowns, and because of just epidemiological common sense. Now it's become something where we're seeing changes in just the fabric of what it means to work in this U.S. Where I think in Europe, the idea of a work-life balance was a real thing. And here, it was never a real thing for certain industries, right? You took it for granted that basically you had to pour in 70 to 80-hour weeks, or if not more, in investment banking to really make it, right? And that was the definition of the job. And now I think a lot of companies have realized that now that people have been exposed to actually spending time at home, to actually making things work with splitting time at home, whether that's contributed to the great resignation, so to speak, or not, I think we've just begun to see how the definition of work has changed. I think for our purposes on this webcast or this podcast, certainly we see a lot of that filtering down into what companies are designing and making and pitching to the new, is it consumer, home worker, enterprise worker. Everybody is somewhat blended now in what they're doing, location wise and consideration wise. So I think that it's been a good kick into the business sector to force them to innovate, and also to some degree to the consumer electronics companies and the pro AV companies and the collaboration companies. It's been a kick in the pants there, where now they've had to design for considerations that weren't necessarily hardcore considerations for them before.
So help us pull back to a 30,000-foot view to really look at how these dominoes are going to fall one after another. It's part of a blog that I wrote a year ago about how everything's going to happen with everything else. If people are realizing that they can work remotely successfully, they don't have to be at home all the time. But
Right.
The point is, they don't have to be commuting to the office all the time.
Right.
What impact is that going to have on the technology manufacturers? What impact is that going to have on real estate, on cities, on what houses or apartments I choose to get for myself? Is the consideration of whether or not there's space to have a place to go now something that I'm going to consider if I can afford it? Obviously, there's privilege involved in this as well. But
Right.
how do you see these things impacting on each other as culture changes because of all of this?
Wow, there's a lot of interrelated things there. One, let me start from, let's say, from the office outward. Uh, the nature of commercial real estate has changed a lot, right? As far as the amount of office space that companies need, the amount of existing office space that's being taken, companies are evaluating whether this is a good use of real estate budget or budget in general, and can we have a much smaller space, not just in this location, but across the enterprise, smaller locations in general, because our average occupancies are that much lower, right? Are we
But
paying for
it's not just smaller, it's also repurposed, right?
right?
If you are going to go in, you're not going to go in to sit at a desk. You're going to
Right,
go
open
in to
floor
meet with
plan
people.
desk. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, you might have less need of an open floor plan desk without getting too much into the debate of open floor plans. Uh, there's still some things you might get done more efficiently in an office, but especially face-to-face collaboration, those huddle rooms and those smaller meeting rooms are now even greater importance. But do you need the open floor plan capacity to have 80% of your workforce in? That's just not realistic anymore. So yeah, the configuration of that workspace has changed. If we think about commuting, the real estate markets have broadened somewhat where people don't need to be within commuting distance of work per se if they only have to go into work only a few times a month, right? So then they might be okay with living an hour away or something else. So you're not necessarily bound to the cost structure of living close to that city, that workplace, that area. You have employers now considering compensation, right? Whether they should be paying people less, unfortunately, because they're not necessarily coming into the office every day. There's just so many interrelated things. I think when we think about conference rooms, right? Or we think about collaboration spaces, there's less of a market now or it's a more challenged market now for a lot of the enterprise collaboration vendors that were used to selling lots and lots of um, ceiling, beamforming microphones and lots of, boundary microphones and things for these larger meeting spaces. And now looking more towards, all-in-one units that can be fit into a smaller room that have a bit more intelligence where they can, do electronic PTZ to focus in on a speaker and so forth without needing a more elaborate, like actual PTZ type setup. And it's crazy. Microsoft is going through that whole program now with Teams where they're letting you trade in all your old legacy conferencing equipment for cash value. Obviously for them, they wanted to do it to encourage publicity for Teams, but also it speaks to how much companies are finding themselves with excess conferencing gear and collaboration gear that they just don't use anymore.
Well, it's
They need
also,
to get
when
rid
you
of.
used to buy that gear in an enterprise environment, you would amortize it, 10 years, 7 years, 5
Right,
years. And we're at a point now, we're like in an 18 to 24-month cycle
right,
where the technology is coming out is so far better than what was out there before that rooms become obsolete very quickly, systems become obsolete very quickly, and the stuff you buy today is easier to put in, less expensive, more powerful, and smarter. So
right.
it's really an amazing cycle where people who haven't started upgrading and taking advantage of changing the floor plans in their offices really need to kind of get off the stick and do it now because the opportunities are amazing.
Yeah, and you think about the just the infrastructure they used to have to put in, cabling wise and so on, and now that you've got better and better implementations of Wi-Fi, secure Wi-Fi within the floor plan. Uh, Literally, these things you can move around. These smart sound bars with cameras and so on, and really intelligent beamforming microphones. It's not too hard to pick them up and move them from space to space either, right? So you have flexibility in what you're doing now, and it's like I said, it's kind of hard to really encapsulate all the changes, every single touch point that um, the pandemic and related changes have brought on when it comes to collaboration and AV in the enterprise. I mean, it's just incredible.
Well,
We
let's
we
focus.
haven't seen the end of it yet. Yeah,
Yeah, let's focus, like we said, for a second before we're at the tail end of the other one on the home side of things, which is, the pandemic started. It was, stay home, flatten the curve, grab whatever you had. A lot of people putting in their consumer earbuds and holding up a tablet or using the built-in cameras, and the
right,
quality and reliability wasn't there. It was
right,
fine for a temporary quick fix, but now you've got people realizing, look, if I'm going to be spending 60, 70, 80% of my time working from a home office, my clients, my colleagues need to see me better. I need more reliable gear. This needs to work better. And again, it's those dominoes. It's like it's not enough that I get a better camera and a better microphone or a better headset. Now I need to have a better place to put it because I want a place to go. I can't
Right.
just be sitting in the spare bedroom or on the kitchen table to do this. And again, that impact on where I live, since I don't have to be so close to the office, maybe I can get, a bigger apartment or a bigger house a little further out and have a dedicated office. And if I'm selling my house, that becomes a great selling point going forward. A lot of this is just going to continue to spiral and domino, correct?
Yeah, and you think about even if some people they don't have the budget or the market is not conducive to them getting a new abode with a spare room or someplace that they can easily set up, where people might have simply just worked off their laptop before. Now they're actually thinking about their actual setup, their ergonomics, at home, getting a monitor stand, getting a stand for the laptop, getting a chair where they can actually be at a proper, seating angle, not hunched over in front of the laptop. You name it, a light,
The
for
multiple
video
displays.
purposes.
It took me
The
a while
multiple
to,
displays,
to
the
put. I had a
stand.
second display, and I've got a third display up there. I don't want to tell you how many displays I'm looking at right now, but on my main work PC, I had to get used to a third display because I couldn't handle two anymore. It wasn't enough.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the nature of what people consider having enough to work with at home, like before, is just hey, you had your laptop on your lap or at your dinner table, and that's just not. It just doesn't work anymore for doing it every day, hours and hours a day, and to some degree, and I'm using one now. Virtual backgrounds have helped a little bit with people considering what rooms they can do their work from. But even then, all the noise and so on taking place, or where people might not have considered using something other than, hey, the earbuds that they have nearby, or hey, the microphones on their laptop, uh, they actually now are considering, okay, maybe it's worth that extra $100, $150 for some enterprise level, or actually that's not even, we'll get into that in a second, but some cans or some high-end earbuds or something that work better at cutting out background noise and pick up my voice better. um, it, those considerations weren't there before, and we see that need, and the obviously companies wanting to make money off of addressing consumers' needs being reflected in how we're seeing computing gear evolve, right? So we have laptop manufacturers, notoriously put horrible front cameras, so front-facing cameras in laptops where it was an afterthought, right? It was just something you had to have, and if it wasn't HD, no big deal. If it didn't perform well in low light, no big deal. If your microphones, they're just there sort of to help pick up some noise, but if they're not really, set up for noise canceling and beamforming array, no big deal. No, that's not good enough anymore, right? So we see laptops coming out where you have two and sometimes even more microphone arrays, and there's beamforming going on, and they're focused on voice clarity, right, occluding outside noise as well. And you have even down to Chromebooks, you see HD cameras and then better low light performance in the cameras built into the bezel of that laptop display becoming more of a standard thing because
Well,
it's just been a point of focus now.
it's even more than that in that this this market, for lack of a better term, which is the high end home user that's now spending more time at home. The question becomes, since they've just about realized that the built-in stuff is not very good and they need to go up gear at some point, do they, are they looking at the professional gear manufacturers for the higher quality things? Like, I'm wearing my Voyager Focus headset, it's the best on the market, or and I'm using a Poly P15 camera, of course, but we're also starting to see some of the consumer companies starting to address this market and make their own. Well, you know what? We're going to build a camera into our display, and we're going
Right.
to give you a picture frame system. And there's this recognition that it's no longer just build an iPhone and use the consumer demand for it to push it into the enterprise. Now it's, hey, you know what? We're going to be building products for this high-end home so people can up level and go forward.
Right. And you have if we look to just maybe 2 years ago, the pre-pandemic period, when you were looking at earbuds, headphones, like full cans, and everything else, that sure they had a microphone in them. Yeah, you could use them for calls. It wasn't necessarily focused, but you didn't need it to be, right? I mean, it just wasn't a concern for people who were buying those products. And looking from the consumer survey side, I'll put in a plug. Parks Associates has been in business 35 years. Surveying the U.S. consumer market, and so we've got a lot of data there. And those weren't that high a buying consideration for people before. But now you see things like how clear my voice comes across in calls, how good the microphone is at keeping barking dogs and ambient noise and whatever's going on in my household away from the transmit side, right? People on the other end of the call hearing it. Those are actually considerations now, and you see the manufacturers building in what used to be one microphone per earbud. Now it's three, and it may be more going forward, to do multiple things, right? Picking up your voice, occluding it from the outside, to doing active noise cancellation. We see even, accelerometers and so forth being used in earbuds now to perform bone conduction, right, under high noise circumstances. And that was something you never consider them being in earbuds before. And even cans, where the consideration used to be that people bought cans because they wanted, at least on the consumer side, they wanted really high music sound quality, right? Or they wanted really high fidelity, and they wanted passive noise cancellation. But even now, that's not good enough. So you're getting cans that are doing active noise cancellation, but also 2, 3, 4 microphones per side, right? To do the dual functions of cutting out not just outside noise to the wearer, but outside noise on transmit to the people on the other end of the call. And these were not considerations you had a couple of years ago. And they were not considerations that manufacturers ever reasonably thought that they would be addressing, right? I mean, because they're like, okay, well, why should I spend the cost to design this into the product? And on the other side, we see a lot of companies that are in the space traditionally on the call center and productivity side and collaboration side, evolving the designs of their products for the consumer market as well. So besides Poly, and I have a piece of Plantronics gear on here as well. Actually, pre-pandemic era gear, which is if you can't really see it too well, it's not really the coolest looking thing, but it works well. You see a lot of these companies designing now aesthetically, textures, colors, etc., more even down to shape and design, right? Visual design and aesthetics.
It has to be more than just something that works. It needs to be something that joins your lifestyle and makes things look and feel better.
Consumer considerations, right? Or even home decor considerations, right? If you think about the some of the products that are out there for tabletop speakerphone purposes and so on, textures, fabric textures and colors that are more amenable to different, like household lifestyles. Those were not considerations for the pro side either a few years ago. But now in this new blended style of working, they have to design it with consideration that it may go in a huddle room in an office, or it may go into somebody's household in the room that they have, as their little impromptu meeting room for their startup, or for their own productivity purposes. And similarly, if you're designing earbuds, whether you're Poly, Jabra, or so forth, you can't just make something that goes in the ear. It looks pro. It has multiple microphones and it works well. No, it's got to be a rounded design. You got to have it in multiple colors. It's got to have all these consumer considerations, right? So it is interesting to see it affect both worlds. And I think that's the great contrast of everything right now, where you have all that expertise now kind of in a Venn diagram where it's overlapping, right? You have people that were used to designing for consumer concerns now verging over into pro, and you have the pro side used to designing for enterprise and pro level collaboration purposes, now verging over to consumer considerations for what they do when they design their products. And I think the consumer is better off for it, right? We get better performing, better looking, better lifestyle compatible gear, and in the end, that middle ground there between the two, to me, it results in a better level of performance for the user, right? You're more comfortable wearing it because it fits better. You're more comfortable wearing it full time because you're not worried about what it looks like as you're commuting or as you're outside and you're conducting this call. But also you are very secure wearing it all the time and, using it and being confident in it because the microphone performs well. it's not going to pick up the washing machine, going through a cycle in the other room. So I think it's good for the collective industry to come to kind of meet in the middle here, because the nature of work today kind of combines both ends now. It combines both worlds.
Let's slide our focus a little bit from the home office and the home professional user to more in your wheelhouse right now for the consumer side, for getting the home set up, upgraded, during this pandemic. We can talk. We'll come back to talking about cinemas and movie theaters, but
Yep.
if a home theater 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago was a very high-end, expensive chairs, large projection screen, all the other, control system in the room. And home theater
Right.
now is, you run down to the Costco and get an 80 or 90-inch display and a little Dolby soundbar that goes underneath it with a subwoofer, and you're there. And it's
Yeah.
not as expensive or unreachable as it used to be. And people are doing that, aren't they?
Yes, and the thing is also larger screens, and it's outrageous how big the direct view screens have gotten these days. But the need for an elaborate setup, whether that was having to install of a high, of a high reflective performance or high performance screen surface and a projector, and you had these discrete AV receiver and separates systems, and you took a lot of space to really realize a home theater. And where now the complex thing is figuring out, okay, where you want to place everything. Do you want a projector, or do you want a really large 80 plus inch TV? Okay, great. Do you want a soundbar? Do you want a soundbar with wireless rear speakers? Do you want a soundbar that's got Atmos in it? And so while the nature of what you can just pick up and bolt on and bolt together is never going to be as good as a really serious AV receiver based separate system of really high performance components. A lot of people, they just, the nature of consumers now, so many people are not really wanting to dedicate the space and the trouble to really realizing that setup in their home, right? So they want a relatively strong performing setup, and to get better audio than what they're getting from their TV at a minimum, which is not a hard bar to surmount these days. But what you can do today with a lot of the sound bars, especially now that they have Atmos becoming more affordable, like upfiring speakers in the front, wireless rears that also have an upfiring speaker, you can pull off quite a lot with what you can get just at your local Best Buy or other retailer in terms of getting a pretty decently sounding home theater setup. And it won't have the depth or the oomph or the detail of a serious system. But on the other hand, you won't need to dedicate the amount of like floor space or placement consideration or mounting that you would have had to go through and figure out.
And cost as well,
typical
right?
setup, and cost. And so, it's not as bespoke a setup, and it's not going to take as much to realize, a pretty solid amount of sound as it would with a traditional type of mentality. Now, well, with a traditional type of configuration and mindset for what you would need.
And if I'm, the typical home user, if I'm quoting the stats from my friends at CES, I'm subscribed to somewhere between 4 and 8 over-the-top services nowadays. Whether that's Disney Plus or Netflix or HBO Max or all that. I don't want to leave anybody out or put anybody in, but
Yep.
at this point, when a movie comes out, it's a real consideration. Do I want to watch it at home, or do I want to go to a theater? Now, going out with friends to a theater is always something that's fun to do from a social standpoint, but when you add in COVID and you add in the costs and you add in the inconvenience and you compare what my experience would be in a dirty theater seat with $40 popcorn, watching in a 17-plex theater that's in a mall, as opposed to me sitting at home in my family room or my living room with an 80-inch screen and Dolby, and I can pause the movie whenever I want. I think we're at a point where the film industry is realizing and suffering that unless they've got a number one top blockbuster, the whole distribution chain around that's going to have to change. People will want to go to the theater for grandeur, not for a 17 plex.
Right.
Other than that, they're going to stay home. I mean, is
Right.
that a trend you guys are reporting on and seeing as well?
Yes. So first thing, Parks Associates research in the latest quarter, we see that the U.S. broadband households, it's gone up. I think it's gone up from 43 to 46% a couple quarters ago to now 49% of U.S. households have 4 or more streaming video subscriptions, right? To nearly half of all broadband households. And so the rate of consumption, I think, subscription growth is starting to slow down a bit when it comes down to streaming video. And it had to. It couldn't go on forever at the pace it was making, but it's not going to go down, right? I mean, it's just elevated itself. Like I said, things have been accelerated because of the pandemic, and so the natural pace of what was happening simply got quickened a bit, but it wasn't something that wasn't already happening. And so you have a lot of people consuming streaming video. You have obviously a creeping up of screen sizes that are available at retail, and not just the screen size, but the screen size per dollar. Right? If you think about how much a 75-inch screen costs now compared to 3-4 years ago, it's outrageous how much that has dropped. And even 85-inch screens, they're actually
Affordable
within
now.
price target for some consumers. So the market's changed, the affordability of the gear has changed, but also when we look at the cinema, because the nature of being able to watch entertainment has changed. It's no longer these windows where you might see it in the theater. Yeah, you could see it this weekend, but to wait for it on home video or on Blu-ray might take 6 months to a year, right? Or make 2 months, 3 months. No, you're likely not to see that spacing or those type of release windows again. And people are actually now considering that trade-off, and they're not going to the cinema as much for the same type of content or the same type of experience, right? So we see the cinema industry going more towards experience-related cinema. So making more out of two things, like making better use of that space that they already have towards, let's say, if it used to be a 17 plex, now it might be a 7 or 10 plex instead, where they're using it for more marquee type entertainment, and the experience has been built out more seriously, right? So you have better sound systems.
Have you seen that as a trend that's starting to happen, or are you just predicting that it will happen?
Yeah, it's already happened or happening. So you see reconfiguration where you get more premium experiences at the theater, where it's better seats, better service, expanded menus. Now there's alcohol in some theaters. You have phenomenal sound systems, like higher quality projection, or digital projection. And at some point, there's going to be a higher incidence of direct view LED, direct view screens in cinemas. So the nature of what it means to go to the cinema and what it means to try and get people to come, what experience you're giving them, right? What value equation you're proposing for them to come and spend $20 on a ticket, and to spend for more expensive food. It's the experience. And also on the content side, you have a lot of these theaters repurposing and bringing people in for viewing of concerts and games and other types of content,
things that can't be done
live.
easily at a home theater. The live entertainment, right. Or the actor or the director speaking about the film before or afterwards, or a contest or something like that.
Right. So something more experiential, right? And then so especially, let's say, big sports games. Well, you don't want to go through the trouble of getting a ticket to go see it at the stadium or go deal with parking and stuff like that. But maybe you want to go see it in a bigger atmosphere than at home, and you want to be around people and a type of festival atmosphere, or you want to go enjoy an arts performance live, but you don't want to go to New York to watch that performance, right? You want to watch it in a place where it's not your home, etc. So the nature of the content that they're carrying is starting to change, and the cinema experience is starting to change. But I think for people, that value equation has also changed. What will they actually go to the cinema for? If they got pretty good sound at home, they've got a really big screen at home, they got the comfort of being at home, then it takes more to get them to go to the cinema, right? So it wouldn't necessarily be, well, the price is so high, right? I mean, even if we kept the price the same, the nature of what they can enjoy at home has been elevated, right? So that the feeling that, this is just such a diminished experience, me watching at home on this little screen and through my TV's audio. Well, that's not necessarily the case anymore, because you might have a sound bar. You might have a pretty good sound bar and subwoofer. Maybe you have a 5.1 system with a sound bar. Maybe, but at a minimum, you probably have a much bigger screen than you did 2 or 3 years ago. A lot of people bought smart TVs during the pandemic, or at least even post-pandemic, they're still buying smart TVs, big smart TVs. It's just the nature of what you can do at home has changed, and so I don't know that the cinema industry is going to be the same ever again, and I don't necessarily think that's bad, right? I don't think it's going to disappear or go away, but I think the nature of what it means to show movies and what it means to have a movie theater, quote unquote, versus where we might see cinema being more the word that's being used rather than movie theater, because cinema is not necessarily bound to just movie content, right? And that's how the industry is changing, where it's just a place to really enjoy content at a big scale. And that could be movies, there could be live performances, it could be live sports. We will see. Um, but gone are the old cheap seats of the old cheap seats of legacy experiences, where it's fabric and it had gum, and maybe somebody else's Coke was spilled onto it from the last viewer, and you had sticky floors, and you were lucky to get popcorn and soft drinks. No, it's an elevated experience we can expect going forward from cinemas too. So it's not all change is bad. I think it's been a disruptive time for the film industry, but they're innovating very, very hard to stay alive, and I think the consumer benefits from that.
It's a good change. I'm glad that it's happening. So two more topics I want to cover before we wrap this up today. The first one I think is really important that we focus on just for a second is what's going on with gaming.
Yes.
And I think you can look at this from a number of different angles. You can look at it from the big M&A that's happened recently in the industry, where Microsoft is buying, and everybody, a lot of companies are buying other companies up. You can also look at it from the perspective, on our smart devices, our smartphones. We used to be able to go to an app store and microtransaction purchase a game and play it. And that, for the most part, is kind of moving away, because they're trying to build in games that you have to subscribe to, because they're looking for that recurring revenue stream.
Right.
So whether it's a game that's got microtransactions built into it, or the only way you access the game is by the monthly subscription to the platform, it looks like most of the technology platform companies are really trying to move toward this gaming as a recurring revenue stream. Is that a trend that your research kind of shows and holds up?
I think we're not necessarily seeing it in the consumer survey side, but I think we were definitely seeing it as we observe what's going on in the gaming industry. That is the nature of where the business is moving to, and I think it's not just from a lot of these big ecosystem companies, like your Microsofts and Sony, and Netflix is getting into gaming. I think it's also because you see the gaming companies themselves looking at that short-term transactional revenue, that one-time transactional revenue, versus the prospect of recurring revenue, and both look good, right? And maybe you get people to come in with an initial transaction or not, but long term, it's more stable of a revenue stream and revenue structure for your company to have that committed long-term recurring revenue. And so I think the preferred, well, as you mentioned, there's basically two preferred tracks to this, right? One is either a subscription for access to the gaming experience, right? I mean, if they're not a member, they can't play. Or number two, microtransactions with it, right? DLC, like so downloadable content, and content packs and add-ons and additional missions and maps and so on. And that's certainly been around quite a while, and gamers are used to that dynamic. And now that it's being more it's being made into a more realized revenue source. I don't expect that it's going to go away. Gamers have generally complied with this pretty well, and they're going to continue to do so because they feel that they're receiving substantive value, right? Extra missions, extra characters, extra weapons. Now, what that is worth dollar wise, if it keeps escalating, then there might be some backlash. But I think we can expect this to continue going forward, and at least for the gaming companies. I mean, there might be, and we'll see what you think about this, David. I think between the Fortnite and Epic Games, affair, and Apple, who then owns that revenue, right? Should it be the people that make the hardware or the operating system upon which that gaming is taking place? So Apple, right? Should they be the gatekeeper for that transaction? or can that transaction, should it rightfully be the ownership of who created the transactional experience within their particular app or game that happens to be played on that device or on that platform, right? Or on that device platform, I should say. So it's I don't know. It's a snake eating its tail. Where do you really get into this argument? Because who owns that experience? And I don't know that I have an answer for that, but I think is an interesting battle to see as it's change is taking place in how we're monetizing gaming. And I'm very curious to see how it ultimately settles out, not just with Apple and Epic. I mean, beyond that, looking over the next 5 years.
They're certainly all very invested in it because they see there's a lot of cash to be made in the process.
Yes, yes, and you see all of the major. If you think about what's happened in the last 5 years, all of the major cloud computing giants in this on this planet, well, including those in China, they're all invested in cloud gaming now, right? I mean, they are not just heavily committed to gaming, but they're heavily committed to trying to monetize gaming long term, right? Because they're all losing money when it comes to cloud gaming at this moment. They're all committed to making money off of gaming on multiple platforms, right? Finding a way to make it stick on whether it's a platform, or I'm sorry, whether it's a smartphone, it's a tablet, it's a game console, what have you. They don't necessarily want to be bound to one type of hardware for you to consume gaming content on. And they've already made the investments on the cloud side, right? So Amazon, Microsoft, Google. So they're trying to better leverage that investment in ways that less capable companies aren't able to do, right? Where they're constrained to being a console player, or they're constrained to being in one place. And we see Sony attempting to pivot very hard now with whatever upcoming revision they have to their services model and their cloud gaming model to try and compete with Xbox, and their particular subscription service, quote unquote Netflix of gaming, Xbox Game Pass that combines cloud gaming with the subscription, and now Netflix getting into gaming. So it's a very interesting picture as a lot of companies look at gaming as the next dimension of entertainment, right? Not just filmed entertainment,
Sure.
but entertainment to basically make into a revenue stream.
Entertainment, gaming, esports. There's a big battlefield going on over there with all of that stuff. All right, and
Huge.
last topic for you to get your input. I'll pull out one of my here's a little avatar from my Bloomberg days. Okay, well let's talk metaverse just for a second.
Yes.
It was probably the most hyped, biggest BS word that came out of CES this year because everybody was claiming to have it. Nobody really had it. Nobody really understands it, and nobody has any pants. If you ever look at any of the icons and any of the things online, the VR, they're all shirts, no pants. But
Right.
anyway, it's unfair to ask you for a quick answer to something that's that complicated. But give us your brief take on what's going on in metaverse and what people should be paying attention to today versus waiting on and letting develop before they look at it very hard.
I can give you a quick answer, but it's probably because I'm the first to tell you that I think I'm a bit ignorant when it comes to the metaverse, at least the complete scope of it and what it means for the business world, what it means for the entertainment world. I think that it's still the Wild West, really. What does it mean to have a representation of your brand within the metaverse, and who controls the real estate or the world that you're in? And are you in contextually, where are you located? Are you located in the right place in the metaverse for people to find you? Right? If you're a business, if you're a brand, it's really hard to define. And I think because it's so new, the time is good if you're a Facebook Meta, right? Not Facebook anymore. If you're one of these huge stakeholders, okay, in the metaverse, and in technologies that are related to the metaverse, right? Whether that's AR, VR, what have you. Because it's such an early and nascent period, it gives opportunity for a lot of these companies to create the standards, to create the norms, to create the dynamics, and to help crystallize them into what becomes the standards within the metaverse over time. So I think it's a good time for them. I think it's a bit of a nascent time if you're thinking about getting into the metaverse. and you're thinking about making an investment to really, have a representation in the metaverse, I'm not trying to discourage it, but I would say that it's a nascent time to be getting into it because it's so new. But it is exciting.
I like the Wild West expression of it a little bit better because that's a little truer. Also, a little bit of wag the dog in there. People are saying whatever they want to say to up the game.
Who makes the rules? The
announcement.
people with the guns make the rules.
Yeah.
So that's not the right analogy, but it is in similar spirit where it is the Wild West. So the people, making a lot of the foundational pieces, the foundational fabric of what we see and experience in the metaverse. A lot of those stakeholders, they have the ability now to set some of the norms and govern what will become the standards going forward. So,
and ultimately, what will or will not be more of this blurring, be more of what's going to be in an enterprise versus a consumer, and what people will be doing with whatever the next generation of online experience is.
Right, and I think that we'll see if you agree with this level of stretch for an analogy here. But I think if you think about, I won't say older folks, but if you think about wiser men of a certain age, wiser folks,
digital immigrants,
that have had to,
as opposed to digital natives, digital immigrants.
Yeah. So if you think about people that generationally are much younger, getting into the technology scene or enterprise, or even just society, let's forget about the lines between consumer and enterprise. They don't really have the idea of those lines that we may have had, because we're decades older, right? Or we come from later generations, and or earlier generations. Let me get that right. So for them, the lines between pro and enterprise, they may not ever be the same. There may not be that line, 2 generations from now, or even 1 generation from now, where it's all sort of a blended reality, right? You just happen to do business while you're at home versus you're watching entertainment while you're at home, but they all take place at home, right? There isn't really a enterprise world, at least maybe in terms of the level of business you're doing, but in terms of the traditional idea of it takes place, and it's a lot of office buildings, across an international footprint. I don't think that's going to be the same ever again, because right now it is an international footprint. We're all connected via the internet, right? We're all conducting business over the internet, over a video call client. It's still enterprise business. It's just not taking place in enterprise digs. So I think for a lot of the newer generations, there's not going to be that same consideration. Maybe even in the metaverse, what's a storefront versus what's a personal storefront versus a corporate storefront. Maybe they both have really cool logos on them, right? Or maybe they have really great slogans on the outside, or maybe they're very well decorated storefronts in the metaverse.
Or all restaurants are Taco Bells, if you want to go back to the demolition man
analogy. So it's getting off the rails there, but I think it's hard to define, what the norms are going to be in the metaverse, and it is because it's so new. But I think it is also great to have the years of experience that each of us do, and to be able to see a lot of change taking place, right? And to kind of remark on how fundamental it is compared to even just a few years ago. And of course, getting back to some of the grounding of this episode, how so much of that was already in motion has been drop kicked into high gear over the last 2 years because of the pandemic. So we've gotten, I wouldn't even say it's 2 years and 2 months. I'd say it's 5 to 8 years within 2 years worth of progress. Yep. Easily.
We all need to fasten our seatbelts because it's not going to get any slower anytime soon.
No,
Paul,
it's not.
Great insights from you. I appreciate it. If somebody wants to reach out to you or find out more about what you do, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, yeah. So, you can get a hold of me on Twitter, of course, Paul Erickson AV on Twitter. And also I'm with Parks Associates, so parksassociates.com. And if you have a question, you can always email me at paul.erickson@parksassociates.com.
Well, thanks very much for being my guest on this episode. All of you, thank you for joining us today on episode 44 of Connected. We're coming up on 50 pretty soon. I'm going to have to do something special for that. So for AVNation TV, for the IMCCA, for all the organizations I'm with, I'm David Danto. If you want to reach out to me, as I always say, Google me. There's only 2 of them, and I'm the one who's not the guy in Canada. A pleasure hosting you for this one, and we'll see you on the next show.